Hello, and thank you very much for your continuous support for the Chorus podcast. Today, we have a very special episode because we have a bona fide leader in the field of sustainable tourism, setting the standards for destinations, hotels, or even tourism operators to be verifiably sustainable. Without any further ado, joining us on the Chorus podcast is Roi Ariel. Welcome and good afternoon, Roi.
Hi, Jihan. Great to be here with you.
We are very excited to have you on the show to discuss more about sustainable tourism, which is one that you are committed to. But before we dive right in, would you please kindly introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So as you said, my name is Roi Ariel. I work currently as the General Manager of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, mostly known as the GSTC. Which means I also manage the organization operations, communications, memberships, and events, working closely with key governmental agencies and also influential companies to mainstream sustainability in tourism. While we speak here, we're in the same time zone. I'm speaking from Taipei, Taiwan, which I call home for the past almost 7 years. And I've been working on sustainability in travel and tourism for the past decade.
You have had an amazing career in the field of responsible travel and sustainable tourism, and you have been to and worked in a lot of continents and in various role capacities as well. What was the spark that ignited everything?
Well, I think the beginning is actually a fun story to share. That was in 2011, 2000, or was it already 2012, when I was doing my bachelor degree at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And I was supposed to write my thesis in a course about developing countries in the international system. I did a dual degree in international relations, focusing on Asia and development, and also another part of my degree was comparative religion, focusing on Buddhism. And I was thinking, what should I write about? And I was at that time at the Hebrew University. They did something, and I think it's still done, something really nice, where if you study in humanities or social sciences, you must take some introductory courses from science. Or the opposite, if you only study math and computers, you need to take courses from social sciences and humanities. So I took a course from biology about elephants because I just love elephants. Who doesn't?
Yeah, we love elephants too.
So I thought to myself, perhaps I will write about elephants and development, economic development. And at first, some of my classmates were joking, but when I was going through it and was trying to research, I did find out that there is a connection. That connection that I found, the more I read, is through what I found to be known as ecotourism. Something that has a terminology and research behind it about this subject. And eventually what I did is I wrote about how ecotourism helps to achieve some of the Millennium Development Goals back then, looking at examples of ecotourism projects within Laos, especially those that build upon the Asian elephant. So through that, I realized that I was actually an ecotourist a few times in my past when I was traveling in Southeast Asia, and it's really amazing to actually dive in and do this research about some of these places that I've been, but not from a tourist perspective, but actually from an academic, from a researcher perspective, and that was fantastic. Now, while I was writing this about the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, thankfully, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who is if you can point to one person, an important person behind the MDGs, that would be him. And he came to Israel and visited the Hebrew University and gave us a lecture. And after the lecture, I had a chance to spend a few minutes with him speaking about the subject of my thesis, and that was fantastic. So it really encouraged me to go forward and understand that there is something behind it.
It's like the stars are aligned always. It's like kind of if things are meant to happen, it would. I mean, who would have thought that Professor Sachs, right, would actually travel to Israel and to the university that you were studying in to actually talk about this thesis topic that you wanted to do.
Yes, exactly. So that was really fun to have that encouragement.
So you were talking about your initial exposure to ecotourism, and obviously, as we know, you have advanced your career, understanding more about the bigger umbrella of sustainable tourism. So, what was this personal journey been, and how has your understanding of sustainable tourism evolved since your thesis paper?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. So when I started about a decade ago, I was mostly in my mind, I was focusing on ecotourism. But later on, I think it was around 2014 when I was working for EcoPeace, collaboration between Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians. When I was working on the green economy criteria and green business checklist, I came across the GSTC criteria. And there I actually understood that the term of sustainability can actually be used in all sorts of tourism. It doesn't have to be in this very niche segment of ecotourism. So still at that point, I continued to focus my passion specifically on ecotourism. But I realized that it can actually encompass much larger part of the tourism industry, and not only that very specific segment that cater to already, let's say, more focused or maybe more aware tourists that have this intention to participate in these activities. Now, later on, when I was with UN-ESCAP in Bangkok, and I did some research about institutional framework of Southeast Asian countries, I was actually looking for data. I thought about looking to see. Eventually, I didn't put it in my research, but I was looking into trying to find statistics and data about some claims that I've seen by ecotourism professionals and organizations saying that it's the largest growing segment of tourism, or it consists of 10% or some other numbers of it that's part of the tourism industry. And I came to realize that none is true. There is no specific understanding on what is the segmentation, what's the percentage of ecotourism out of all tourism activities. It's a little bit difficult to say. But I realized it's kind of the citations and the quotations was about others that quote the same thing. So there was no source. It somehow got to be there, and then people continued to quote it. And as part of it, when I was kind of becoming a little bit more critic on this issue, I realized that it has this possibility to look at sustainability in all sorts of tourism and not only that very specific segment. And now, when I give any talk, a webinar, a talk when pre-COVID, when I was speaking at conferences or others, every time I spend at least one slide in my presentation speaking about the difference between ecotourism and sustainable tourism, which in short means ecotourism refers to a very specific segment of tourism that focus on natural areas, usually with some local community and has some cultural aspect, but the natural environment is very crucial. While when we talk about sustainable tourism, this refers to an aspiration to all types of tourism to be more sustainable, whether it's ecotourism, health tourism, adventure tourism, or just food tourism in a big city. All of this can be more sustainable.
We are going to talk more about that later because I think that is something that ordinary travelers or consumers like us would benefit from understanding the difference between the two, because it is true that it is mostly both terms in fact are quite overused at this moment, right?
Oh yes, definitely. Unfortunately, I read too many articles where there is just a mix of usage between the different terminologies. So there is a mixture of understanding between ecotourism, sustainable tourism, responsible tourism, and now a new term that is popular by certain people, regenerative tourism. All of them, people just mix them all. But there is from academic perspective and then from business, operational, technical organizations like the GSTC and others, we put a weight and importance to these terminologies. So it's quite important to understand the differences.
Of course, and through the Chorus podcast, we also aim to expand this knowledge of sustainable tourism as much as we can. So, you were talking about your role as the general manager of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, which is the GSTC, as you were mentioning. Can you share more about this association, about its goals, activities, and its influence? I believe that there is no other such association such as the GSTC.
Right. So, if we look now at in short, the GSTC, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, what we do is that we manage the GSTC criteria, which are the global standards for sustainable travel and tourism. And it's really important to note that we don't see GSTC, the organization, as the owner of these standards, but rather the keepers of them. Meaning that it doesn't belong only to us, it belongs to everyone. And we just keep them and protect them. So in that sense, are an independent and neutral body that was established about 14 years ago by UNDP, UNEP, the United Nations Foundations, UNWTO, Rainforest Alliance, and a coalition of 32 other organizations, both governmental and private organizations, to establish these standards, that we will be able to have this conversation about what sustainable tourism is, not just in an academic perspective, but actually when we go and try to identify what is a sustainable tour company, what is a sustainable accommodation, and so forth. So later on, what happened to be is that we also provide international accreditation for sustainable tourism accreditation certification bodies. But I think that if I would kind of segment what GSTC as an organization, what it does, I can divide it into 5 points. One would be the development of the international standards. That's the GSTC criteria. The second would be providing assurance for sustainable tourism. That's recognition of other standards as proper, that they include the criteria, or accreditation, meaning verification of the certification process. The third point would be making destinations more sustainable. So that would be through working with national tourism organizations and destinations, developing a specific criteria for destinations. The fourth would be promoting market access. That's working closely with prominent OTAs and large travel providers. So we push and promote and support the usage of these standards and certifications for market clarity for understanding what are those businesses and enterprises that are sustainable. And the fifth, and of course very important, and I would say part of the podcast touches on this, and that would be increasing knowledge. We specifically do it through our Sustainable Tourism Training Program, STTP, but we also do it in many other ways. And that's, I would say, all of these activities are conducted by our secretariat, but we also have a membership, and our membership is quite diverse and global. And the membership really play a crucial role. So the idea and thought behind the GSTC actually becomes kind of a movement that the community and the network of members work together to promote. So it's not necessarily that only we at the Secretariat go and converse and promote this idea, but we actually have a lot of members in different countries and different levels and different organizations that promote wherever they are the GSTC criteria and sustainability.
That is a positive sign for sure. And I mean, you have so many members under the GSTC. How do you ensure that the GSTC criteria, as you were mentioning, remains relevant? Because as far as we're concerned, the sustainability standards, change and evolve all the time. How do you keep up with that?
So I think it's kind of quite important it's really, really important topic that you touch upon. Originally in 2007, when the organization was created, in order to create the GSTC criteria, it was a really long process. It took about 2 years to develop the GSTC criteria. During that process, we actually consulted with about 80, we invited relevant people to comment on the development from about 80,000 people, professionals in the field. And that's really from all over the world. So it wasn't something that was just created somewhere in North America or in Europe. It really included everyone from all over the world and from different countries and different segments. Now, we also analyzed about 4,500 criteria, different criteria, in at that point about 60 existing standards, voluntary sets of criteria, principles, and guidelines. So we looked back then in 2007, 2008 at all these. First, we identified all the existing criteria, standards and principles and guidelines. We looked and tried to identify what is repetitive. And we found out that actually all of them have this core thing. So that's how we developed the criteria. And then we invited for recommendations and public consultation on the drafts. So that's how it was created in a very, very inclusive manner. And I think no other standard or label comes closer to that. Thankfully, what we do now is that all the around 50 standards that GSTC recognizes, when we revise once in a while the GSTC criteria, they follow and include these revisions in their standards. So in that sense, their standards are also inclusive because they follow up with the GSTC criteria. So in that sense, to answer more directly to your question on how do we keep it up to date when things evolve and change, is that we at GSTC, we follow the ISIL Alliance Standard Setting Code. The ISIL Alliance is an alliance of sustainability standard owners of organizations. Examples would be FSC, MSC, and others. So what we do is about every few years, we review if there is a need to revise the criteria. If a revision is needed, then we go through a very lengthy process that usually takes about between 1 to 2 years. That includes input from very respectable organizations, for example, IUCN, WWF, the World Animal Protection, and other organizations from social aspects, from environmental aspects, and so forth. But anyone is also invited to provide comments and suggestions through public consultations and workshops that we conduct. And it's really important for us. So let's say we revised the GSTC destination criteria in 2018 and 2019. And what we did when we had a conference in Botswana and also a conference in Chiang Mai in Thailand, we spent time to conduct a workshop with the participants and local stakeholders to get input specifically there from them. But that's just an example. We really, really encourage our partners to bring input from all types of stakeholders and not only those that already work in this international sphere.
That's a very tough job, I assume, because you have to hear from so many different people. You need to consult so many experts in this field. So if I may take the time to kind of like do a resume of what you have done so far, what is your proudest achievement to date since joining the GSTC as the general manager?
Well, I'm going to speak about something else. Something else of something that I feel proud every time. So as part of me managing the organization's operations, communications, membership, events, it's also include the events, meaning the conferences. So we have these, pre-COVID, we had global conferences taking place once or twice a year. And I must admit that seeing through a successful conference really always makes me good. So it's very, very tense from an organization and operation, and the producing of such event is always very tense in the the build up towards the event, but during the event and afterwards, it's always I feel quite happy and proud, and I like, and the reason is that I think it also gives me an opportunity to set an example of how to conduct a more, let's say, more environmental friendly events and or more sustainable events, make the conference inclusive and so forth. So for example, in our last on-site conferences in 2019, we haven't conducted in 2020 and this year, the host destinations no longer provided red meat for the participants, and we actually encourage, so the default choosing of the meal would be vegetarian. So the default is that you're vegetarian, and then if you want to change it, then you have the option to do that, but that's the default.
That's very interesting. It's almost like a reversal of what we are very used to.
Exactly. So we don't compulse people to change their behavior. If one, it's really important for one to have certain consumption, then we change it. They have the opportunity to do that. But then when the default is vegetarian, then many people just stay with that. And in that case, we made sure also that the meals and the dishes that provided are actually quite exciting. So if you are an omnivore and you eat everything, you will enjoy it as well. And of course, local ingredients.
Very smart choice for the event organizers in the future to take note.
Absolutely. Another thing that I can point to is that our events have now better representation of women, indigenous people, and underrepresented nations, both speaking and attending. And that's something that I'm very happy to say that I've been actively contributing to make sure that it happens. And another thing that's it might seem obvious now that we speak in 2021 during COVID time, but prior to that, I think I want to say that making the knowledge shared and the conference available to all was something quite important. So what we've been doing is that we shared, although we had an on-site conference, we made sure that all the conferences are recorded and shared live. And also the recordings are still available on our YouTube channel. And in, let's say, 2020, 2017, 2018, 2019, we've seen thousands of people joining in and watching live our conference from all over the world. And that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed seeing people from some I knew, some I have no idea who they are, but it was fantastic to see that participation. So that was something that just makes me, from an operational perspective, quite proud and enjoyable to be able to share this knowledge. But I would also say another proud moment that always happens is that when I see formally, when I see that another country or another region or another OTA or large organization or small organization put to use the GSTC framework in their own different way. And every time when I know that I had some part in it, I feel proud. But of course, the credit goes to that destination or that organization. But I do feel that I had part in it, and that's what makes me quite happy and very happy to wake up in the morning and work on that.
It's a fulfilling job, as we may say.
Yes, it is.
Well, that brings me to pose, I would say, a difficult question, if I may say so. How effective or successful do you think the GSTC has been in advocating and spreading more awareness on the topic of sustainability in travel?
Yeah, that's a direct question, but I'm happy to answer that. Maybe I'll separate my answer into a few parts. The first would be start with our trainings. So we have this program, this Sustainable Tourism Training Program. That's the beginning. That's kind of a way for us to influence and share the knowledge, how to use the GSTC criteria in a manner that is relevant for each one. And those participants later on apply the criteria in the way that it's relevant for their organizations. And over the past year and a half during COVID time, we've actually seen such a huge increase in our demand for trainings that we've actually now established from this year, we offer 2 new trainings. So we actually have 3. One focuses on sustainable tourism in general, using the GSTC criteria at the core. The other one is a shorter course for hotels only. And then we also have a new course about sustainable business travel for those corporate business travel providers. And we've seen a really great demand in that. So that's really strong in the advocating. But I think I'll reiterate what I said before, that the GSTC as an idea of using a common language and a global standard, I think it really relies on the members, the community that support this, and as kind of being a movement. So this network of people really promote this advocation. And then we have this push by large entities, such as Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, that uses the GSTC framework and give preference to work and sign contracts with tour operators that are certified as sustainable tour operators, or the same would be with TUI group that also support it. Nowadays, I mean, that was at the beginning. We had this just very focus on push and support from just a few organizations, especially this example by TUI and Royal Caribbean that has supported the GSTC from the inception. But now when we speak in 2021, we actually have much more large organizations that help to promote it and use the framework. So that would be TUI, EasyJet, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, MSC Cruise Lines, Hilton, Booking, Agoda, Hotel Beds, about 20 countries that formally are GSTC members, with many other countries that use the framework in a different manner. So I think that since I joined in 2016, I really see a difference, and I really can say that comparison year by year, the influence and impact is growing of the GSTC, but the credit should really go to the members and the community that support the GSTC.
It's always very heartening to know that the network is like a virtuous cycle, right? People promote you and talk about the positive things and the great things that you do, and from there it kind of sprouts out into a entire forest of positive seeds. I think that's always very heartening to hear.
Indeed.
So we were talking a little bit earlier about accreditation, and something that I learned from my previous conversation with you is that not only is it important to be certified, but it's also important to have an accredited certification. So with that, how can we better educate the ordinary consumers about looking not at just a green label, but understanding that the green label is accredited from a source such as GSTC?
Well, we're now speaking actually about a very important but challenging topic. So I personally know quite a few people that I've had this conversation about this topic 5-10 times, but still I feel that there is a need to encourage the right use of terminology. So because from a layperson perspective, recognition, certification, accreditation can mean the same when you go to the street and just speak with a regular person. If we're looking at from technical perspective, if we're looking at into ISO standards and clarity on terminology, then we see that there is a very clear difference between these terms. So maybe I'll start by explaining in this topic that we at GSTC, we're familiar nowadays with we know of about 180, give or take, 180 labels and standards of sustainability in travel and tourism. Now, some of these standards and labels, they only refer to very specific area of expertise. For example, we have standards that only look into the environmental perspective of an operation of hotels. So this standard cannot be used by a tour operator, and this standard cannot be used. It's not relevant for perhaps an entity that wants to look into what's your social aspect, what is your impact on society. Because that standard only helps you to measure your environmental impact and make sure that you reduce electricity usage, single-use plastic, and so forth. The GSTC criteria, it has 4 pillars in it. The first would be sustainable management. The second would be social and economical perspective impacts. The third would be cultural impacts, and the fourth would be environmental impacts. So out of this 180 standards, the GSTC has a procedure where we recognize other standards that include these 4 pillars, meaning that they are holistic. They include them and all these 4 pillars. And we call it GSTC recognized standards. So GSTC has a recognition of other standards. So that's the kind of one part of assurance that GSTC provide. The second part, and that's what you refer to with the accreditation, that's really important for assurance and liability and verification of claims. But some are being used for certification, meaning that you use a standard to give an award, you certify an entity saying that it complies with this set of criteria within the standard. And you give them that label that we often see of a logo and so forth, and it says certified and perhaps a number underneath. Now, this year has been actually easier to speak about it because a few months ago, there's been a very popular movie that came out on Netflix called Seaspiracy. I don't know if you've watched it. Have you?
Yeah, I have. It is actually pretty mind-blowing because of the way of how the film was being directed. It's a very, how do you call that? It kind of shows you the dark side of things. I mean, that's what they were going for, right? The conspiracy theory. So yeah, to me, it has been very glaring in terms of like what is happening on the ground.
Exactly. So it's really quite impactful. And yes, I know that there is criticism about certain points of information and data that might not be accurate. And I tend to agree that I saw quite a few things that might not have been 100% accurate. But again, that movie is not produced for engineers and scientists to watch and go over and read and explain if it does peer review and so if it goes through a peer review or not.
Yeah, it's not academia.
Exactly. It's for everyone and to influence people's perspective and action on seeing things. But what I want to say about that, there is one point there where they look and they try to understand about one label that label has a claim of something, but they ask them and they realize that that claim is not really what is happening. So who verifies that this claim is real?
I remember that.
So out of these 180 standards and schemes that we are aware of, some of them are being used for certification. And then some are being done in a professional manner, while others may or may not. So there is no one who actually reviews them. And that's the strength of accreditation, where you actually go and you certify the certifiers. So if one is being certified by an accredited certification body, you have the assurance that the process of certification has gone through a proper vetting. That's what accreditation is looking at, on the process of the certification, not the standard itself. It doesn't care about it cares about the language, but it doesn't look at the language, if the language of the standard, if it's good or not. It just says, this is the standard. How do you actually use this standard to check if an accommodation or if a tour operator complies with it? So those that are certified by an accredited certification body really have this assurance. Now, this assurance has liability, because if you are claiming for something and you open yourself to liability on that for your claims. So hopefully the claims are being vetted properly.
Well, thank you so much for this short lesson. I feel like I'm the student on the front row trying to keep raising my hand to ask more questions, because as you were speaking, I was like, oh my God, I have so many questions to ask, but I'm going to kind of focus myself in the right direction so that you can help us to answer the questions one by one. So maybe let's wrap up a little bit about your role in GSTC. GSTC has so many members, labels, hotels, destinations, and also the service providers. How do you actually manage this whole ecosystem, as we say, and then keep that synergy among them? Because we were mentioning just now, it's a nice virtuous cycle where members and labels kind of bring themselves into the positive cycle, right?
Oh yes, I definitely agree. I mean, let's be honest. In any interaction with different stakeholders, there are some challenges, and not necessarily everyone sees the same sees reality in the same way, or perhaps interests are a little bit different by different stakeholders. So it is a challenge, but on the other way, I think that the strength is to identify what you can work on with these type of stakeholders. An example would be a destination that uses the GSTC destination criteria. So they might apply it just for them as a destination, using that and try to improve their management, their sustainable management of the destination. But then a destination can also use and promote the industry criteria, how they can work together with the local hotels and local business owners to support their trainings or support other type of certification or incentive or knowledge or other type of support to them. I'll give you an example. So one key stakeholders for GSTC is all those standard owners and certification bodies. We pause it now, but on our annual conferences, we would have, prior to the conference, we would have kind of day zero, before day one, we would have some meetings, because everyone is coming from all around the world, and it has still, I mean, we know now more and more people are accustomed to speak through Zoom, Skype, other forms of communications, not meeting in person. But there is something that us as humans is crucial when we meet in person, and allow some other social interaction that sometimes helps to overcome some ideological or organizational challenges. So we would have these meetings just for certification bodies, a closed meeting. Sometimes it would become a little bit challenging because certain organizations see things differently, but it's really healthy to have these discussions rather than not have them. And I would like to maybe just finish with one note that is really cool, is that many times what we do is that when we work with one type of stakeholders would be DMCs, the inbound tour operators. We help them to understand the idea of how they can influence their supply chain. So, for example, a tour operator might go and work with local accommodations and provide questionnaires to understand, hey, are you sustainable? Are you doing this, and that? Do you have any credentials for that? And if not, perhaps support them with knowledge and experience. And the more tour operators do that, the accommodation realize, oh, well, my clients, the big buyers of the hotel space are interested in that, then perhaps I should make this adjustment. Such as, for example, take this example of that vegetarian food, right? So perhaps both of us now speak from countries that vegetarian cuisine is abundant, and the society is accustomed to vegetarian food. But perhaps 10 years ago, you want to have a conference or purchase a large space in hotel, meaning X amount of rooms for a tour, and you have a demand for halal, kosher food, vegetarian food, whatever. it might have been a challenge, but I think nowadays it's much more common to have these accommodations being able to provide these solutions and provide this target audience what they need. So this is an example, and that comes from a change because many have demanded it.
Yeah, I think the circle is going to get larger after COVID, and that's always a positive sign for all of us. So let's go back a little bit. When I was doing my research, and you were talking a little bit earlier that you have worked with EcoPeace, which is a tripartite international association which deals mostly with the water crisis in the most water-scarce region on the planet, which is at the center of the environmental crisis in the Middle East, with repercussions on politics, war, and also peace. My question is about governance and how to twist the arms of governments which arguably own the ultimate key to positive change. I would like to know what you have learned in your endeavors to create shared solutions, to take a bottom-up approach to educate local constituents, as well as a top-down approach to advance vital policies. Do you use what you have learned in the frame of what the GSTC does yearly on the sustainability agenda?
Yes, so in 2014, when I was working on the Green Economy Initiative with EcoPeace, as you mentioned, EcoPeace is kind of works on it's an organization that its model is based on environmental peacemaking by building cross-border cooperation, focusing on issues related between the environmental issues and, of course, with the economical perspective of them. So that work is between Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians. And I think that a key takeaway from me at that time there, seeing that people and organizations can and should always talk. And there is always something that can be discussed, collaborated, and cooperate on certain topics without necessarily touching issues that are, let's say, untouchable. Or as an organization, you might not be able to touch and solve the real political issues, but you can put it on the side and focus on some other segment that you can cooperate on. And at GSTC, where, for example, I like seeing that at the GSTC that we're actually willing to speak with anyone, anywhere, regardless of who they are and what they do and what's the general perception about their operations, if they are sustainable or not. So I personally received criticism about how can GSTC work with the cruise sector or with airlines. But the answer, I think, is quite simple. These companies are here to stay, right? Even through the COVID time, they are still operate. I mean, the airlines still operate. Cruise lines were put on pause, but there is a demand for it, and people want it, and it happens. So if these companies are here to stay, and they wish to make changes, and they wish to promote more sustainable practices, shouldn't we help them with that? Shouldn't we work together with them rather than throw away the opportunity to work and then they will perhaps not do anything, or perhaps they will do it but not in a professional manner? So for me, the answer is very, very simple and clear. I would prefer to work with anyone about sustainability issues, and we're happy to find frameworks that would benefit and would provide impact and influence on the entire industry. So I think the same thing it's with the EcoPeace model. Work on some topics related to the environment, but while putting back then it was environment, but the GSTC is the whole breadth of sustainability. So work on that, but put aside as much as possible the other real political barriers. So that's something I can say I took from there, and I do it now. And there's an organization that GSTC is doing, and I'm very happy to be part of it.
And also, I know of a new and emerging business model in the tourism industry. It's obviously the online travel agencies, or the OTAs. And you mentioned in an interview last year that you say that the OTAs have the biggest potential to push the sustainable and responsible tourism agenda forward. How is that so, and how can they do better in this respect?
Right. So So we speak now, and I think that if someone will hopefully will listen to our conversation and will learn a thing or two, then probably it most likely will be tourism professionals or other sustainability professionals. So in short, people that work in this sphere rather than travelers, rather than just making a decision of traveling, which is, of course, everyone is welcome to listen. But my point is that GSTC and ourselves, the focus is to speak with businesses, with governments, and not necessarily with the tourists and the travelers. So the OTAs, if we work with the OTAs and the OTAs are promoting actively sustainability to the customers, then mainstream. If I would choose just a one-word answer to is by mainstreaming. They help to mainstream it to the travelers. 1 month ago, Booking.com has published their 2021 Sustainable Tourism Report, where you really see an increase of the preference by travelers to prefer sustainable accommodations. So most travelers would actually, I think it's 80% or so, would prefer to stay at a sustainable accommodation rather than they don't care in what type of accommodation they stay. So there is this preference, and OTAs now, such as Booking.com, but there are others, Eco Hotels and Agoda is following suit, and we also at GSTC work with hotel beds, they follow suit, and they provide this information. So OTAs, on the one hand, they create incentives to those accommodations that are certified as sustainable, perhaps highlighting them or perhaps providing some information on their pages in the platform. But it also encourages other accommodations on that platform to improve their practices and perhaps achieve certification. But even if they don't achieve certification, that the OTAs promote. What happen is that they promote those sustainable hotels, and they influence those I wouldn't say not sustainable, but those hotels that didn't, or accommodations that didn't spend time to make their operation more sustainable, and that while communicating it all to the travelers and tourists. So it helps to show the demand. And it helps to kind of create a bridge between the travelers and the providers. So it kind of bridges that demand. So it pushes it here and it pushes it back. It shows accommodations that there is a demand here. And then, so that's kind of why I think OTAs really have a crucial role and a huge potential for impact on this world.
Yeah, I like what you were talking about, because we also read the article and the report by Booking.com about the sustainable preference by consumers these days. And in fact, they are not the only body that has been publishing related articles. There are a lot of research that has been showing that customers now do prefer and do value what the tourism operators are offering in terms of the sustainable practices that they are undertaking. And so that brings me back to the same interview which I read about you, which was on sustainability leaders. And I loved your response because I thought it was a very candid one, and it was regarding sustainability as a marketing tool. And I think that that's a very good follow-up with what you were saying earlier. And because since the interview was done last year, after this whole year of the pandemic, have your opinions changed about that? Do you still think that sustainability is more of a marketing tool, or is it really a concern from the part of the tourism industry partners?
Well, I think it's kind of it's kind of relevant for both cases. On the one hand, usage of sustainability in the world in a way that is not necessarily true, and on the other hand, there is real use of it. And maybe I can provide some examples. So I really think that over the past 3-4 years or so, let's say since 2015, especially with the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that were agreed upon in Paris in 2015. sustainability really became a buzzword, and many times it's being used inaccurately, sometimes even in funny or bizarre ways. And maybe I can share a story. I remember I was attending a few years ago a conference where it really felt like each speaker just they had a reminder, just drop the term sustainability in every phrase. Just drop it. Doesn't matter where and how. Oh yeah, sustainable drinking, sustainable this, sustainable that. And while I was thinking about it, and I thought it's a little bit funny, that evening, right, a conference or the destination likes to show a little bit of its culture. So the highlight of this case was an announcement of the host before a show during dinner time. And now for the sustainable cultural show, they proclaim. And I was shocked. I mean, what is it, a sustainable cultural show? It's a cultural show, but you can't really, I mean, it's a little bit weird when you present it to audience that are about to eat and watch a cultural show and say it's sustainable.
I know what you mean. It's like everything, once you add the sustainable word in it, suddenly becomes more socially acceptable, right?
Exactly. So, you know this meme, or if you've watched the movie, the original source of it, where Inigo Montoya says, you keep using this word, I don't think it means what you think it means. From The Princess Bride, but it's now very common to see it in memes all over the place. So I really think that many times there are people that using this word, but it doesn't really mean what they think it means. So I think on the one hand, still sustainability is being used in as greenwashing, but I mean, in this case, I wouldn't call it even greenwashing. It's just inaccurate usage of it. But on the other hand, we really see over the past year and a half during COVID time, a really uptake of organizations, governmental organizations, countries, destinations, as well as the private sector really spending time to do that. That's because of COVID and has a little bit more time to deal with some other aspects. That's because also the sustainability movement that is become stronger and stronger, the environmental movement, social aspects that became very strong over the past few years. And also in the finance world, where ESG became something that, almost the same as speaking about sustainability. It's just like, what do? Oh, don't forget to drop that ESG there. It's kind of like that. So all of this kind of really brought spotlight to the issues of sustainability, but people do take it in a serious manner. I would say that both exist. Both that greenwashing or inaccurate usage and real usage and uptake. So, but in general, I'm quite optimistic and positive. I would prefer inaccurate usage of that than no usage at all.
That's true. That's where you can come in to kind of promote it and advocate the idea of sustainability a bit more, right?
Exactly.
We were mentioning earlier about the 4 pillars of sustainability, which is the frame of the GSTC criteria, and it falls right as at the moment when we're talking about inaccurate usage of the word sustainability. And in fact, the 4 pillars, as you were mentioning, goes beyond the environmental standards per se. Why is it important to expand this concept of sustainability also into the social and the cultural aspects and also the community aspects?
When we speak about sustainability in general, we might say that it refers only to environmental and social and economic parts. But when we speak about tourism, culture is very, very important as well. So back when the GSTC was developed in 2007, 2008, we were looking at all these existing criteria, standards, guidelines, and so forth. And we recognized that they all fall under these 4 pillars of sustainable management, sustainability and the impact on socio-economical perspective, the cultural element, and the environmental element. In many cases, many standards omit the part of the management, but some other standards only speak and only discuss and focus on the environmental issues. And then you have some sustainability standards that are general and then just being used in the tourism industry, and perhaps cultural aspect is not there. But you're speaking to me now from Singapore, a really amazing country. And if one goes to Singapore, then for 2 days or 3 days, they would probably experience or want to consume some cultural aspects. Who can go to Singapore without visiting a hawker stand in a hawker center, the food courts, to try the food? And what is food if not a cultural aspect? Or how can you visit Singapore without seeing this fantastic sustainability, the urbanism of Singapore, or the eclecticism of mix between cultures, of the Chinese culture, the Malay culture, the Indian one, the European one. So all this stuff are really amazing, and that's, I think, some of the issues that make Singapore as a destination interesting. But that would go for anywhere else. If you take away the cultural aspect, what stays? Perhaps only environmental. Yeah, that's fantastic. I would like to go to a national park in this country or that continent. But the cultural aspect is crucial. And also these national parks many times have some cultural aspects to them. So some of them, unfortunately, people were displaced, but in other places and other situations, national parks or national attributes of natural environment rely on some local cultures. So the cultural aspect is really crucial.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same for, you were talking about national parks, is what has been practiced quite diligently in Taiwan. When you go to the national parks, which are usually towards the suburbs, which is not Taipei, you do find the aboriginal culture in most of these national parks.
Yes, you will find near them. So exactly. So the cultural aspects is really important. And then think about going to Bangkok in Thailand, and first timer to Bangkok will go to the Royal Palace to visit, which is fantastic and beautiful and really important part of Thai culture. Put aside the food, just going there. But if it's not being managed well, there can be over-tourism, or there can be some other aspects. So culture should be used as part of the tourism industry, but it should be protected and known how to be managed properly. And I think that this holistic perspective of looking at sustainability and the GSTC criteria can also be seen in the finance sector, where ESG has become now more and more important. And what is ESG? It's environmental, social, and governance indicators. So environmental, that's the fourth pillar of GSTC. The social aspect is the second pillar of the GSTC. Governance is the management, which is the first pillar of GSTC. So cultural aspect is not there, but it can really fit on the GSTC criteria, and then plus the culture. Nowadays, all the very strong sustainable tourism standards in tourism include these four pillars of the GSTC criteria.
So I understand that you have been in Taiwan for a couple of years now, and in your early years in Taiwan, you were doing a master's thesis on models of community-based tourism, which is based on the Atayal tribe in Taiwan. Can you share more about what is the findings and your experience working on this thesis?
One of the things that I came to learn after coming here and starting my studies, my master's degree in applied economic and social development, I was taking a course with Professor Dakasi about the social and economic development of the indigenous people in Taiwan. So if you're not familiar, the indigenous people of Taiwan, they are part of the Austronesian people. That the Austronesian people are the same of those that live in other islands in the Pacific. So that includes Micronesia and Polynesia, but also people in Southeast Asia, Philippines and Indonesian islands and so forth. And in Taiwan, currently the government recognizes 6 different tribes or people. I personally prefer the translation to English from Chinese Zhu as people rather than tribes. So the Atayal are the third largest group of indigenous people after the Amis and Taiwan, and the Atayal live in the mountainous areas. So that's in the central part of Taiwan, in the mountain area. And I just kind of fell in love with the magnificent scenery and being so impressed with some of the usage of traditional indigenous knowledge in a modern society that I decided that that's what I will research. And there are two places that are quite famous for people that, for Taiwanese, these two villages are quite famous, and for others perhaps that you people heard about them. So what I did is I actually researched these two villages. One is Smangus and the other one is Jinshivu. In short, we can say that in general, in the world of community-based tourism, you can say that there are kind of three separate models. One would be of operation or management. One would be that the whole community manages everything together. And in that case, that's like Smangus, that work as a collective. They call that collective cooperative. They call it Tunan, and which means weaving together. So that's something that they manage everything together. So when you go to Smangus and you would like to stay there, for example, for one night over the weekend, you don't go there or call there. You just call one center, their office, and they will arrange where you can stay and tell you these rooms are available, these are not. The second model would be that there is collaboration in the community of how to manage the tourism, but each household there is segmentation to each one to its own. So there will be some collaboration, but each one is its own business. And that would be, I think, probably more similar to most cases. Just like in a city, right? You don't share. Even if you're in a building, you might share some aspects, right? Some management of who cleans the building and throwing of trash, and you share some guanli fei, the expenses of
the management.
So that would be more similar to that, and that's what's happening in Jinshivu. And then there would be a third model, which I did not look into, but just exists, is that there's just an outside organization, a tour operator, that goes to the community, go there, and provides all the services and goes out. So you as a tourist or as a traveler, even if you're just doing everything by yourself, you don't, just from the management perspective, you don't call for accommodation, you don't call the community or a household within the community, you organize it with a tour operator and they manage everything. So perhaps there is no accommodation, or perhaps there is in the community. So I looked into that, and it was fascinating. I loved it. It was quite challenging because it actually was faster to take a flight to Hong Kong from Taipei to actually get there by transportation, because I went there using public transportation, hitchhiking, but it was fun. I enjoyed it.
I think it's very fascinating. It helps you to really be on the ground and to experience it firsthand, right?
Yes, exactly. So really this experience, not just doing it from afar, but actually being there, really helped me to understand. So if I kind of narrow down into a few takeaways from my research without boring people too much about models of Ostroms and community pool resource management and so forth, I would say common pool resource management, which is a reference to something in economics, is quite important in such type of communities. The second is that we really, as society and as humanity, we have a lot to draw and learn from traditional indigenous knowledge in a way that is being encompassed in modern life and society and modern even capitalist systems can be done and can be used, and that there are many community-based tourism models. Not all of them work, and these models, so for example, I've read a lot of research being conducted about mongoose because it's kind of very fun and very nice to read about this first model, because it's really nice to read about and write about. But many people don't want to be part of some cooperative. It's literally like a commune or an Israeli kibbutz or a cooperative. They share the income. They share it, the benefit, in a very equal manner. So it doesn't matter if you're a manager or cleaning the toilet, you will get the same salary. And in that sense, it's not for everyone. So it's really important to understand that some community-based tourism models work for certain places and some might not fit.
Yeah, it's an interesting remark because we have also interviewed some guests previously, such as Suyin from Discover and also Ying Zhou, who leads the Gelang Adventures. Both have their takes on how effective or how impactful the community-based tourism could be. And so the question goes to you: what do you reckon is the true impact of community-based tourism, and do you think that they are mostly effective in community development?
I think that there is sometimes a false understanding about community-based tourism. So it is a model of tourism. It is an economic model that can work, but it's also a business. So just like a business can or cannot work. I remember my first place that I used to live here in Taiwan, there was on the main street a corner that probably about every half a year, that shop closed down and then the new shop opened. And next to it, a shop closed down and they opened a new type of shop. So, sometimes shops or businesses work and sometimes they don't. And it might be that it's not necessarily that the concept is bad or the management is bad. Perhaps it's just the location. Perhaps it's just the timing. The same would be with CBT, community-based tourism. It's not a panacea. It's not a cure, or it's not a model that fits all. So I think, yes, there's been many successful stories about community-based tourism, but I think that there are actually more cases that it didn't work or didn't last more than a few short years. There are more of these cases compared to the successful cases. So I would really encourage anyone who researches community-based tourism or actually is involved in community-based tourism to really look into cases of what happens. I have colleagues that are doing fantastic work, were doing fantastic work in Myanmar. Unfortunately, the current situation put a halt to everything there. But also in Thailand and some few other countries, there are fantastic work that is being done and a lot of knowledge being created and to guide and support these communities that want that. We know of communities that just don't want that. So in short, I would say it's a good model when and where it fits, and it might be a harmful model where it does not fit. How to identify? That's a big topic.
I feel like we have learned so much from you over the past 1 hour. It's really amazing. We're actually approaching the end of this interview, and one thing that we have been asking our guests is what advice do you have for the next generation? And I know that you have been in this industry for a long period of time. How do you actually retain that passion for the sustainability in tourism, and how would you encourage the next generation of leaders who is keen to pursue a similar path as you?
Well, thankfully, I work in this field at this decade and not perhaps a few decades back. So I can see the impact over the past few years. But I think from seeing comments or some behavior from professionals that were active in this field a few decades ago, I think back then, in the 90s or 20 years ago, it was much more difficult to speak about it and have listening ears, and the development or the impact, I think, was much smaller. So some of them nowadays are a little bit skeptic, but now I really, really see the impact. And it does help me. I mean, yeah, I'll share with you. I received, I think it was a week or two ago, I received a nice email from a colleague in the Bahamas thanking me about something that I personally in GSTC as an organization provided them. And these messages of people really showing appreciation, just this person-to-person appreciation always helps. So I think it's, no matter where you are and what you do, I think it's healthy, and it helps each other to keep it up, what we're doing. But I think also I enjoy seeing that there is an impact. An impact cannot be seen within one day. But over time I can see it, and I think that's something important for people that are thinking of what to do, or anyone is taking up issues of sustainability. Unfortunately, we see more and more the negative impacts of the climate change and the climate crisis that we're in at the moment. And I think that impact can be seen faster than before. So that what helps me to retain waking up and in the morning and being quite, beside trying to, I'm not saying that I do, but trying to meditate or practice Tai Chi or some other stuff. Besides doing that, afterwards when I start my work, this really helps me to go through my day, seeing and being active, and also being part of an international community. I love it that we speak now, and you and I come from different backgrounds. Our mother tongues might be different. We have different ideas, but we still we enjoy now a mutual conversation about issues that matter to both you, myself, and anyone around us. And I think this is really fun to be part of this really global village rather than just one small community. But if I would have kind of let's say guidance or encourage next generation or some people that want to go into the world of sustainability in travel and tourism, I would recommend not to learn travel and tourism, but learn other things. So intentionally I say it like that, I phrase it like that. So I am for, and I support people that go into degrees or take courses in sustainable tourism, or study tourism, or study hospitality, or study this and study that. But I encourage also to study other topics. I really believe that me learning political science or my learning of economics really helped that. And from where I come from, the type of education that we receive in Israel and encourage for is really kind of take from different aspects that we have in life, and not necessarily just stay on one very narrow path. Because if you only go through very narrow path, you only see very narrow area. But if you kind of take breaks and go to other branches of where it might lead you, you might come back to the same path that you're going, but with some more knowledge, experience, ideas that you bring from other sectors or other segments. Just an example, the OTAs that focus on the usage of platforms and IT and so forth, and sustainability. 20 years ago, perhaps people could not think about that connection. Perhaps they did, perhaps not. But what I want to say is that sometimes these connections between things and ideas can really push forwards on innovation, but also on a personal level. I think it can make you, and I'm speaking now not to you, Zhihang, but to a person that might listen to us and think about pursuing a path. I think that it can really lead you to somewhere more interesting, and perhaps more elaborative and more innovative and more supportive to the global community, and prevent the climate crisis.
Yeah, I think opening your horizons is very important, at least because things are evolving all the time. We have to keep open. We have to keep our minds open to actually receive any challenges ahead. So, very good advice.
Thank you very much, Zhihang and Benoit and Choice for organizing this fantastic podcast. I'm happy to be connected and very happy to be speaking to you this podcast today.